In October of 1999, a bold protest against the ban on base jumping took place at Yosemite National Park. 5 experienced jumpers, including 60-year-old Jan Davis, aimed to show that base jumping could be done safely if they were done responsibly. Jan Davis, who was experienced at parachuting, and a base jumper who had made over 3,000 skydives and taken part in around 70 base jumps, went to the top of El Capitan, one of Yosemite National Park's iconic peaks. The cliff, rising to a majestic 3,500 feet, is a breathtaking natural wonder of granite towering over the landscape, but what was meant to be a bold demonstration of the safety of base jumping turned into something tragically different. The event was carefully planned with park rangers. All 5 jumpers had agreed to land in a designated meadow at the base of the cliff, where they would voluntarily surrender, face arrest, and have their gear confiscated. The first 3 participants leapt in perfect succession. Their parachutes opened smoothly as they glided gracefully through the air like eagles. The crowd of over 200 spectators watched in awe, their cheers and applause echoing through the sunny afternoon. The sight was mesmerizing and flawless. Yet as the crowd eagerly awaited the next jumper, they had no idea that the illusion of perfection was about to be shattered. When Jan Davis took her turn, she launched herself confidently off the cliff, but her arms stayed at her sides and her parachute refused to open. The observers, oblivious to the unfolding disaster, began to cheer, but in no time their cheers turned to horror as they realized her parachute wasn't opening. Davis plunged 3,200 feet to land on a pile of granite rocks at the bottom of the cliff. Jan Davis was one of those individuals who prepared for every eventuality, but on this day she made a fatal mistake. To avoid having her personal equipment confiscated, she chose to use a parachute borrowed from someone else for the jump. Unfortunately, she was unfamiliar with the borrowed gear, and in a critical moment, she struggled to locate the ripcord. Her own parachute was designed with a back-mounted ripcord, but the borrowed one had a ripcord positioned on her leg, a detail that proved disastrous. In base jumping, every second is crucial, and there's rarely enough time to deploy a backup chute. This small yet significant difference ultimately sealed her fate. As the whole place turned quiet, it sent shockwaves among the witnesses and friends present on the occasion. Her story features the critical importance of preparation and familiarity with gear, as well as the dangers of cutting corners. This is a stark reminder that sometimes risks, however much calculated, may lead to irreversible consequences. During midnight of Friday on February 1st of 2008, a couple of friends on holiday at a ski resort are having a blast together. They've been here with a larger group, and it's been a fun-filled adventure so far. The resort is nestled in Saus-d'Ol, a charming little town in the metropolitan city of Turin in northern Italy, near the French border. It's one of 6 villages that make up the Via Lattea, or Milky Way, a region known for being one of the largest ski playgrounds in Europe. It offers over 400 kilometers, or 250 miles of terrain, with 140 interconnected slopes and 92 lifts that reach heights from 1,300 to 2,800 meters, catering to skiers of all levels amid stunning alpine backdrops. An amusing nonsense talk beneath a ski slope end, a certain skier, a 46-year-old British guy named David Monk, who may have had a bit too much fun as well as alcohol, came up with the idea of skiing across a giant slope. While it was nighttime and visibility was near zero, this wasn't the only thing wild about it. The intoxicated group realized they didn't have a sled or anything even close to being suitable for the job, so they figured it was a good time to set up a makeshift solution. There would usually be a couple of staff around to keep things in check. It was midnight, so the place was totally empty. Taking advantage of the situation, they ripped a few foam pads off the railing and hauled them up the mountain, hiking in pitch black darkness. It took them a while, and by the time they reached the top, the early morning light had just started to break through, but that didn't make their scheme any less dangerous. The makeshift sleds they'd created now seemed like a bigger problem than the darkness ever was. Plus, they had stripped a big chunk of protective padding right from the center of the railing, so if they reached the end of the slope, they'd be crashing straight into the metal fence. The rush of excitement and their foggy thoughts totally drowned out any sense of impending danger. The only thing that could have saved them would have been if their makeshift sleds had somehow slowed down due to resistance or friction, giving them a chance to stop midway, but that never happened. David and the group launched themselves down the slope in their mattress sleds, and within minutes, they were hurling down the hill at terrifying speeds. The rubber pads proved to be as easy to slide as a sled, however neither they could control it nor was there any protection waiting at the end of the slope. A group of people now appearing on the scene watched them barreling down the hill, cheering and shouting excitedly, and then the inevitable happened. David, leading the group down the slope, slammed right into the same spot he'd swiped the padding from. The impact was catastrophic. His head and ribs collided with the metal railing, resulting in several broken bones and punctured internal organs, and he died instantly. Meanwhile, the rest of the group, trailing behind, also went tumbling into the same gap and sustained severe injuries, but managed to survive the event. People watching the chaos rushed over as soon as they saw the group piling into the fence one after another. By the time they arrived, David was already out cold. They did everything they could to help and called for assistance, and the medical team arrived quickly and performed chest compressions on him, but unfortunately, he never woke up. The American Sprint Car Series, also known as ASCS, is one of the most electrifying racing spectacles in the United States, featuring high-powered, open-wheel vehicles engineered for short-track battles that push the limits of speed and control. With tight turns and heart-stopping finishes on dirt or paved ovals, this high-octane sport demands a relentless go-for-broke mindset where drivers willingly hurl themselves into extremely high-risk endeavors, chasing victory at high speeds. As long as it's confined to the track, that attitude is safe enough, but sometimes it can go off the rails into recklessness, setting the stage for catastrophe and entirely avoidable disasters. The 2003 ASCS National Champion settled in the Dallas area town of Forney, Texas. Travis Rylott was running a car interior business with his wife, Mariana, by 2010. After earning his title, the couple had moved to Forney when their parents, Dorothy and Greg, closed up their longtime bait and tackle shop on the Texas City Dike. The shop had been a local resource for fishermen for years, but Hurricane Ike wiped it out in 2008. Losing the family business was tough, but Travis wasn't the type to stay down. He bounced back, starting his own venture while still keeping his racing career alive, and it wasn't long before he found success in both. That's also when he met Tyson Perez, a crazy fellow with the same drive. Travis brought him on as a crew chief and got him selling exotic race car parts at the shop. Hailing from Australia, Perez brought a unique flair to the job. As the crew chief, he was the brains behind Travis's race car strategies and car setups, while also being a go-to resource on the sales floor. The duo clicked well and everything was going pretty smoothly until mid-2010, when Travis got an invite to a series of races in Washington. They wasted no time heading over, ready to hit the ground. But what awaited them was far beyond anything they'd imagined. During their preparations round, one random evening on July 18th, 2010, after wrapping up work on their car at the workshop, they came up with a wild idea. What would happen if they rode a barrel of fire like a rocket? The answer must have been more intriguing than the question, and they couldn't resist finding that out. So they decided they would pick up an empty 55-gallon barrel, rig it up to fire from behind while they sat on it, and take a thrilling ride, expecting it to zoom down the parking lot rapidly like a rocket. In hindsight, this was an attempt at suicide, especially with their decision to fill the barrel with 4 gallons of methanol to spark the fire. They were basically setting up a bomb, but their adventure-seeking minds didn't quite grasp the danger at the time. So sticking to their unsettling plan, they filled the barrel, took a seat on it, and lit it. But instead of the anticipated excitement, all they heard was a loud whoosh, followed by a massive explosion. The blast was so intense that one end of the barrel was flung 37 meters or 120 feet away, leaving the men severely burned. After a few hours, the parking lot was swarming with paramedics and firefighters, and when they were rushed to the hospital, both were still conscious. Medical teams assessed their injuries as third-degree burns covering up to 62% of their bodies, with damage reaching down to fat, muscle, and even bone in some places. The duo was airlifted to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle for advanced care. That worked well for Travis as he began to show signs of recovery, but Tyson couldn't handle the excruciating pain and agony and succumbed to death 2 days later. Following the disturbing event, several sponsors from the racing community came forward and set up funds to support Travis in managing the lengthy medical bills. After a years-long recovery, he made his comeback on the racetrack in 2018, picking up right where he left off. How far would you go for the perfect social media photo? For 2 Brazilian influencers, the choice between safety and style ended in tragedy. Deaths related to selfies have been a public health issue of late, with about 330 people dying each year in accidents while attempting to shoot the perfect shot. The surge in such incidents has made many tourist destinations ban selfies in hazardous areas. However, such measures cannot always prevent tragedies, as seen in the heartbreaking Devil's Throat yacht party incident in Brazil. A group of influencers and friends went out on a day of glamour on waters near Devil's Throat, a notorious coastline off Sao Paulo. Known for the Devil's Cave, a large cave with impressive rock formations, surrounded by lush Atlantic forest, the area offers beautiful scenery and opportunities for crazy adventure, and because of primary attraction, it draws thousands of visitors every year. The day was full of fun and laughter, photos, stunning ocean views, but unfortunately, it soon became a disaster. During the party, guests were given life jackets for the return trip, but two guests, 27-year-old Beatriz Faria and 37-year-old Aline Amorim, refused to wear life jackets, and for reasons that were really shocking, being that the life jackets would ruin their selfies and interfere with tanning, it resulted in tragedy. The weather took a tragic turn. Choppy waters and the excessive weight on board caused the vessel to capsize. The passengers were thrown into the water. The ones who had life jackets on their body remained afloat and were rescued by rescue teams, while Beatriz and Aline were not so lucky. The body of Beatriz was recovered first by maritime firefighters and was found drifting out to sea. After days of intense searching, the body of Aline was found a week later when it washed up to a nearby beach. This discovery marked the tragic end to a desperate search. Beatriz was an established figure on social media, known for a glamorous lifestyle and posts of adventure. A few hours before the incident, they had posted pictures from the yacht, smiling and having fun. Photos that were once a symbol of delight now act as a reminder of how appearances can be so deceptive against safety requirements. On a quiet morning on January 12th of 2020, 21-year-old British tourist Madeline Davis set out for what seemed like a magical experience. Diamond Bay Reserve in Sydney, Australia, which is famous for its stunning ocean views, but also for its deadly cliffs. What started as a sunrise adventure quickly turned into a nightmare. Madeline, a creative beautician and rising social media influencer, was in Australia enjoying its beauty and culture. After a fun night at a party, she joined 7 friends to watch the sunrise at Diamond Bay. The group reached the cliffs, eager to capture the breathtaking scenery. But beyond the safety barriers, the view was even more tempting. Despite warning signs and fences, Madeline climbed over the barrier to take a selfie. Her friends watched as she carefully posed at the edge, the waves crashing far below. Then suddenly she slipped. In a split second, her footing gave way, and she plunged 80 meters into the ocean below. Panic broke out as her friends screamed and called for help. The emergency services arrived by 6:30 a.m., but the search wasn't easy. The cliffs were steep and the waves were rough. After 4 hours, they found her body wedged on a rock shelf 17 meters below the water's surface. Madeline's family and friends were devastated. She had been full of life, talent, and creativity. Toxicology reports later revealed that alcohol and traces of drugs were in Madeline's system at the time of her fall. These substances likely impaired her judgment and balance, contributing to her decision to climb over the safety fence. Local authorities had already taken steps to improve safety at Diamond Bay by raising fences and installing warning signs. However, tragically, these measures were not enough to prevent this heartbreaking accident. When the news of her death broke, some people online criticized Madeline of accusing her of taking unnecessary risks. But her mother, stricken with grief, defended her daughter publicly, reminding everyone that Madeline was a human and that the family was enduring an unimaginable loss. Madeline's story serves as a sobering reminder life is precious, and no amount of likes or social media attention can bring that back. Base jumping is an extreme sport where individuals jump from fixed and altitude surfaces such as cliffs, bridges, or buildings with the use of a parachute to ensure safe landing. At the Grand Canyon, about 11 people die every year from choosing to ignore the no base jumping rule. Base jumping is dangerous but very interesting. If base jumpers are found in the park, they will be arrested together with having to pay a fine of $2,000, and their parachutes, which can be expensive, ranging from $3,000, will be confiscated. Due to this fact, most parks, including the Grand Canyon, have prohibited the practice through the U.S. National Park Service. The Grand Canyon is one of the natural wonders of the world and a popular tourist destination which attracts millions of visitors every year, and for good reason. It's stunning. But stunning backdrops are deceptive. On August 1st, one man came with a different plan. He brought a parachute to Yavapai Point, a popular point on the south rim, planning to make an illegal jump in the canyon. What should have been an exciting moment turned into his last decision as something went terribly wrong during his jump. Even though base jumping is prohibited within all areas of the Grand Canyon National Park and denoted as a high-risk activity, the man chose to disregard the ban, and unfortunately it became a fatal decision. At around 7:30 a.m., the act of the man was reported to National Park Rangers. By the time they reached the site, it was already too late. The body of the man was discovered approximately 500 feet beneath the rim of the canyon. His parachute was deployed, but something went terribly wrong in the jump. He struck the canyon wall, ending what must have seemed like a thrilling moment in disaster, and the extreme heat made it worse. There had been warnings from park officials to visitors not to engage in much outdoor activities between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. when temperatures rose well above 120 degrees Fahrenheit in places that are more exposed. The extreme conditions do not only add more risk to the visitor, but also create very unbearable working conditions for rescuers. Helicopters are limited in extreme heat, and rescue crews make numerous calls throughout the summer. County officials retrieved the man's body the next day. The crew helicopter lifted him from the canyon rim down to the bottom, where his remains were then transferred to the Coconino County Medical Examiner's office. October 1st, 1995. Tens of thousands of onlookers are gathered along the banks of Niagara River for an extraordinary spectacle. 39-year-old Robert Overacker is about to ride a jet ski off the edge of Horseshoe Falls, equipped with a rocket-powered parachute. Several cameras are capturing this hair-raising stunt as he enters the river near the Canadian Niagara Power Plant and races headlong towards the falls. Among the crowd are his family and friends, all cheering him on and hoping for the best. The plan is to plunge over the 51-meter or 167-foot drop on the jet ski, deploy the parachute, and touch down safely in the icy waters below before swimming to shore. For what he hopes to achieve, the goal is to draw as much attention as possible to raise awareness for the plight of homeless people. But moments later, tragedy struck. Born on the 4th of July in 1956 in Santa Monica, California, Robert Overacker grew up with the Pacific Ocean as his backdrop. From a young age, he was drawn to nature and the thrill of pushing his limits. Throughout his growing years, he mastered a lot of acrobatic and athletic skills, honing his talents and igniting his interest in extreme sports. However, it initially didn't seem to be a suitable profession to make a good living, so he ended up bouncing between several jobs, none of which could fit his free-roaming spirit he had. Then, during his teenage years, he fell in love with another cause that changed his life. Throughout his childhood in California, he saw the struggles of homeless people up close. For a bit of context, California has the highest percentage of homeless individuals in the US even today. There are over 180,000 people without any proper housing. While these numbers continue to rise every year back in the 1960s and 70s, it wasn't any less of an issue. Robert, who was close to nature, became passionate about helping his community. He realized he could leverage his love for extreme sports to shine a spotlight on the issue, so he started doing shows and public displays to support this cause. Though he did manage to grab some attention, it wasn't the big change he'd hoped for. Still, he kept at it, waiting for the perfect opportunity to make a greater impact. When he turned 32, he came up with this deadly plan of falling through Niagara Falls on a jet ski. It was hands down his most daring stunt yet, and the potential rewards were equally massive. If he pulled it off, he'd grab a ton of spotlight, which would help him gather the resources he needed to back his cause. The responsibility was huge, and he wanted to make sure he was fully ready. So for the next 7 years, he spent his time planning and prepping for it, even though his friends and family were continuously trying to prevent him from doing it. A couple of times, he got really close to going through with it, but kept pushing it off because of their constant disapproval. As one of the most dangerous in the world, Niagara's Horseshoe Falls dropped 51 meters or 167 feet with insane force, creating unpredictable currents at the bottom. On top of the freezing waters, jet skiing down those falls meant not only dealing with the height and impact, but also the sheer power of the river, which could make the control nearly impossible. Even with a parachute, the brutal winds could mess with deployment, making it too risky to avoid crashing into the rocky base or getting swept into lethal whirlpools. While he couldn't do much to eliminate all the risks, over the years he had come up with an idea to use a rocket-propelled parachute, also known as a ballistic chute, instead of the regular kind. These types of parachutes are used when you're close to the ground, or when the air is so unpredictable that a standard parachute might take too long to fully deploy, so the rocket propulsion attached to it helps the parachute open instantly, cutting down on the risk big time. With enough on-paper planning, Robert finally decided to go for the daring attempt in late 2001. On October 1st, he was joined by his family and a crowd of several onlookers gathered at Niagara Falls, as well as on the rooftops of neighboring buildings and restaurants, all of whom had their cameras ready to record him completing the leap. At 12:35 p.m., Robert entered the Canadian Horseshoe Falls and began jet skiing towards the edge, picking up speed fast. In just moments, he reached the drop-off, letting go of the ski as he plunged into the 51-meter fall. He went to deploy the rocket-propelled parachute strapped to his back, but unfortunately, the unexpected occurred. The crowd watched in horror as he plummeted straight into the white churning waters below, completely consumed by the massive waterfall. His parachute never opened. It turns out at the very last moment, he hadn't packed it properly, and worse, it wasn't even securely attached to him. As the water swallowed him, he vanished from sight, leaving everyone on edge. After several minutes, his body resurfaced, being tossed around by the powerful waves. At first, people thought he might still be alive because the strong currents made it look like he was swimming, but it quickly became clear that his body was just being thrown around by the force of the water, completely lifeless. 2 days later, authorities recovered his body, and he was officially pronounced dead at the nearby hospital. The cause of death was drowning since his body had no broken bones, meaning he didn't hit the rocks, and if that parachute had worked, he might have actually made it out alive.